Welcome to session 6 and session 7 together. What we'll do is go through, look at the application structure, the questions that you're going to get asked this year, and it's been slightly tweaked, but nothing majorly from the previous year. And if you haven't been involved previously, you won't know any difference anyway. We will revisit the turn on course and the fact that we were trying to guide you through how to become an MIEE, but also create a classroom that's really inclusive and accessible, that brings the learners in even further than you currently do, gives you those hooks to use to capture the imaginations of everyone that you've got in the class with you, but also to be working efficiently and to reduce those workloads. So with those things in mind, those also need to come across in your application as well, and make sure that you think of different ways of expressing them. When you first start out, you might think, well, there is only one way of doing it, but hopefully the point of today's session is to be able to show you exactly how you can structure that and make things interesting, but also relevant to what the people want to see at Microsoft when they're reviewing your application. So the process itself is pretty straightforward. It opened up on May the 5th and it closes on July the 7th. There's a dedicated page. You'll get this slide deck and I'll put it back into the team at the end of this session. If you, and I don't believe I've got anyone here where this is the case, but if you were an MIEE this year or previously and you're reapplying, there's a slightly different form and link to use, and that's now on the first page of this slide. If you are a brand new applicant and you've never been an MIEE previously, then use the first page and the program link there. Whichever one it is, you still need to take certain steps, and the first is to go to the Microsoft Education Center as it was, which will redirect you to Learn. I know there's been a massive amount of confusion there, and it still rains down slightly in the fact that by now everybody's history and achievements were supposed to have been moved from Microsoft Education Center to Learn. However, Microsoft can't provide me with answers as to why that hasn't happened, but I know even personally that I can still see everything that I've done historically if I go and log into the Education Center, including things like my previous MIE qualifications and so forth. But if I go across to Learn, I can log in and Learn, and I've now got a separate set of history on there for the courses that I've completed since Learn launched. But as yet, the two things haven't been merged together. Now, I'm assured that this will happen, but I do share your frustration. I'm running another of Microsoft courses with another group of staff, and they've got exactly the same scenario. So if you think, look, I've got some evidence over in the MEC, the Microsoft Education Center, and some evidence in Learn, the best thing you can do is screenshot each and then include that in your SWAY as your evidence. Microsoft will know that there are still complications with that, so don't be worried that you haven't got everything in one place, and it won't go against you as long as you're being transparent. You still need to get the 1,000 points that you would have got in the Microsoft Education Center. Now, you may have done that previously. You may have redeemed one of our codes, and you've got that. You may not have redeemed one of our codes because the code stopped working at a point where Microsoft retired the Education Center and brought in Learn to supposedly replace it. Once you've got that, that will give you the foundation and the basis you need, because you have to be an MIE, a Microsoft Innovative Educator, in order to become an MIEE, a Microsoft Innovative Educator Expert, which is what we're applying for on this course. Because I know that some of you missed the codes that you could redeem in the Microsoft Education Center, today we are going to give you a code for Learn, and we'll show you where to go and redeem that in Learn. There was also a code that's still live for Learn from the last session that we did on Minecraft Education Edition, so you could either redeem today's or next time's. And today's will be associated with 21st century learning design, because that's one of the philosophies that underpins the Microsoft Innovative Educator Expert program. That will then move you towards becoming the MIE, along with the application, which we're going to focus on in this session. The application itself is something that's been around since 2020, 2021, and the process hasn't substantially changed. So the self-nomination structure this year is almost identical to the previous years, which is really reassuring. It hasn't been messed about with. They're just the one option. If you're a returning MIEE, make sure you use the right form, but both the links are on this deck once you get it in our team anyway. The process itself has got 3 phases. Please do feel free to keep popping questions in or sharing your experiences as we go through. I've got the chat open, so I will monitor that. But the 3 phases themselves have not changed since the previous application round. And there's an evidence document that you can pick up, and that's available also on the self-nomination portal, and we'll give you all the links to those in this deck. But the self-nomination evidence document is a Word document that has all the questions that you're going to be asked on the real application and nomination portal, and you can get them prepped in advance and you can write the answers in, and that will give you something to copy and paste from effectively. It's better to prep it offline instead of being under pressure and doing it in the live portal. So the phase 1, as we've spoken about before, is all about you, background information. Phase 2 are the ones that are marked automatically by machine learning. You need to score 70% or above in those questions. And then phase 3 are the long answer questions. And all of those now have to be in by July the 7th. We updated you on that during the last session, but originally it was tipped to be July the 15th. It is no longer that, it is July the 7th. So if you want to have your application reviewed to pick up anything from phase 1 or 2, you need to get it in by June the 30th, which is the week before, and then resubmit by July the 7th. So those dates have slightly changed in the last 2 sessions, but Microsoft changed their minds about the window for applications, so there's nothing we could do about that. We've just had to go with it, and that's one of the reasons why we brought this application session forwards, because it was supposed to originally run on July the 7th, which would have been absolutely useless to you, so hence we're running it today. So the phase 1 is not marked. It won't go against you. You can express whatever you like in there. It's just really for Microsoft to understand you as an individual. It's that background about what you do professionally, how active you are within education IT, the sorts of other software you might use. And yes, it is okay to mention non-Microsoft software. They're realistic as well. They know that you won't just be using Microsoft. So I don't know, if you use Class Dojo in a primary school, or you're using Lexia for reading recovery, whatever it is, do mention in there that you use that, and it's fine. It won't be held against you that you're not using a Microsoft technology to do that. Also talk about the other technology community. So maybe you are really proactive in another forum. Maybe you do a lot of posting on LinkedIn, or you tweet quite regularly about what you're doing. Talk about all of that. They want to know about your social media presence as well as other platforms you're on. And it's just to understand what you're going to be like as a citizen in the MIEE community. You don't have to give your life story, but they just want to know a little bit more about you. And really, phase 1 is pretty straightforward. There's nothing in there that's designed to trip you up. There's nothing in there that's designed to expose you in any way professionally. It should just be a true picture of what you're doing. And if you don't have a massive presence in other platforms and it's not something you do, and actually this is, along with just being a teacher, which is a massive job as it is, this is mainly the thing you're focusing on this year, then don't worry if you haven't got a lot to say. But if you have got other things that you do, other things you want to discuss, do pop them in there. That's the place for them to go. Any questions on phase 1? Anybody looked at phase 1 and they're curious about anything, please do pop it in chat, or you can unmute and ask me now if you wish to. Just checking over to the chat. There's nothing there at the moment, so I'll carry on, but I will come back periodically and have another look at that. So phase 2 is where we'll go next. In phase 2, we are going to have questions that are pretty much closed questions, and you are going to answer them, and I'll either be looking for you to tick a predefined option, or I'll be looking for certain keywords to be written. It will accept more than one keyword, so I don't know, if you put science, it will also accept sciences. It's probably going to be programmed to accept biology, physics and chemistry. I'm just picking an example that's not absolutely true in the scenario of the form, but just to give you an example of the variations that it will accept in the machine learning, and it learns all the time. So if somebody's put an answer and maybe they've put a spelling mistake or there's an apostrophe in the wrong place, then it will learn that and it will then flag those to Microsoft if it thinks that there's a high proportion of answers that could be right that maybe aren't getting the points allocated. It will look at the CPD you have completed, or want to know about the CPD you've completed on the MEC and Learn. As I've said, there was a bridge between those two platforms in the middle of your application round, so please do mention both. And as we haven't yet got your achievements moved across, it is relevant to do so. They are very much quantitative. They focus on the pedagogical use of the Microsoft education tools that you've got in Office 365, but also Windows as well. If you've got something you've used in Windows, maybe you've tweaked the accessibility tools in Windows, and you've got a black background, and you've got green and yellow text to stand out for visual impairments, then talk about that if you've done that in Windows 10 and 11. Make sure that you do talk about the wider set of apps that you've got available. So that's all of the things that we've looked at during this course. It's the Sways, it's the Microsoft Forms. If you use things like Power BI or Tasks, all of those things, if you had a go at them or you've used them even in the smallest of ways, do talk about them because they're in there. As I've said, the full list of those questions are in the link a couple of slides before on this, and it will ask you other areas such as what do you use in Teams, what's your use of OneNote or OneNote Class Notebook in the classroom, do you use other apps such as Minecraft Education Edition, which is what we focused on last week, or Flipgrid, which we looked at previously. It may also ask you about coding if you get involved with that in a primary context or if you're coming from secondary, so things like Make Code, or if you've been involved in anything to do with STEM or STEAM events and you've got something there that you can comment. And then it will drill down in section 2 to the features that are available in the Office 365 app. So it might be, as I showed you on the accessibility session, might be about using the translator to get the words printing and showing up underneath the slides. It might also be about using captions or rehearse with Coach. So there's lots of different things there they want to know about. So certainly if you've used Immersive Reader, make sure you tick it. And I'll ask about frequencies. Would you use it daily, weekly, monthly, rarely, and never? No, that's not going to go against you, but they're looking for you to use things as frequently as possible. But they do accept that certain tools are a little bit niche, and you maybe use them when you're working on a particular unit, or there's a small number of pupils that or students that engage with that, but not everyone in the classroom is going to use it all the time. Also, do mention things in phase 2 like QR codes. It'll want to know about that. And once you get out of, there's some tables to answer initially. Once you get out of the tables, there are some multiple choice answer questions, and you just tick the boxes to answer what you're going to do. So it might be, for instance, if you're using hybrid learning in a classroom, which is less and less now, we've got past the majority of the pandemic issues, it will ask you in Teams, what do you use Teams for? And you click a list of things that apply. So it might be that you use video chat and screen sharing. It might be that you use it as a learning platform. It might be that you hold meetings in there. It might be that you bring guest speakers in to enrich learning in the classroom, which is a good use, an ongoing use of Teams. Even if you've stopped using it for all other reasons, you can get guest speakers in. I was working with a school only a couple of weeks ago who teamed up with the universities in London, but also the Natural History Museum, and they had a guest speaker from the Natural History Museum, and they just used them over Teams. So there's lots of reasons to mention that. And even if it's something that you intend to do in the future, you think, well, that fits quite well, mention it anyway, do talk about it. And that's something you can work in explanations in the phase 3. It's not necessarily a button you can tick in phase 2 if you haven't done it yet. But I do emphasize that if you've got plans that haven't yet been realized, phase 3 is where you'll put them in. So phase 2 is pretty much determined, and you can't go off script. There'll be questions that Microsoft have prepared for you, and you just need to go through and answer them to the best of your ability. More than that, phase 2 is about the equivalent to about 2.5 sides of A4 on screen. You can prepare those answers in advance using the downloaded Word version, but don't worry and stress too much, but you do need to get 70% or more. And as long as you've been engaging with the areas that we've discussed so far on the Turn On MIEE program, you'll be absolutely fine in the phase 2 questions, because we designed this program to cover the areas that they're going to be asking about in phase 2. Any questions on the phase 2 element? Anybody experienced with it? Anybody started to fill theirs in yet and they've saved it halfway through? No? Okay, I'll plow on. We're going to move into phase 3, and phase 3 is where we're going to spend the majority of time today. The phase 3 questions sometimes are a little bit confusing about what you have to do and how you've got to answer. So what we've done is we've gone through and broken them down and given you some answers to what to put in, but also some examples of good evidence that's considered by Microsoft to be really strong. The phase 3 section will be the section that Microsoft will be looking at individually, and you'll get a living human being that will look at these answers that you write in. They are very much long form questions. So they'll be between 500 and 2,000 character explanations. Sounds like a lot, but when you get to it and you've got something that you're really passionate about, or a couple of examples, you will have to be quite frugal with the words that you've got in there. You need to really focus on now those Microsoft tools, all of the ones we've covered so far in our sessions, and any others that you've maybe picked up and dipped into from the app launcher in Office 365, or anything you've gone to the Microsoft Store and brought into Windows 10 or 11, or as I've said, the features such as the accessibility features that are in Windows 10 and 11. And make them easy to understand. There's only a certain amount of time that the team have to go through and assess all these applications, and this is happening globally. And although there are regional assessment teams, it does tend to be that they get a bit of fatigue about halfway through, and if you can make it as easy for them as possible following the guidelines that we're about to give you, it will make it easier for you to get the qualification in the end. So question 1 is a bit of a strange one. I checked only last week and it's still there. And despite the fact there's now a returning MIEE's form, question 1 is only applicable if you have been an MIEE previously. And what it's really doing is asking you about your experiences of being an MIEE and what you're doing in the community. It also features on the returning MIEE form as well, which, as I said, doesn't make absolute sense, but at the moment it's there. So I wanted to flag it to you. So if you are a new MIEE, you don't have to go through this, because obviously you haven't been one previously and you haven't been active within the community. Maybe you haven't attended the E2 virtual conference that runs every single year. But if you have been, you just need to go through and describe what it's meant to be an MIE for you, how proactive you've been, how you've improved opportunities in your own school, but also how you've reached out maybe in the local area or even globally. You may have connected with colleagues in other countries. But it's an insight into the value that it's been to you and the value you've given to others. I'm going to skip on past that because there's not many people here who that will be relevant to, and get on to question 2. So for question 2 is describe how you're using the Microsoft tools, and in bold, I can't emphasize that enough, it's increasing accessibility. And what you need to do is think back to the session where we used Immersive Reader and I showed you all those different learning tools. And for you as an educator, how you use them to level the learning opportunities in the classroom. And even if you're coming to this MIEE application and you're not a classroom practitioner and you are not there every day, talk about how you've shown these tools to people that are other TAs, teachers, and they're working with pupils and students, and get their insight into how it's helped them or how it's helped the pupils they're working with, and describe that. Get some sound bites or evidence from the learners. If you can get an example of a piece of work that's been produced or how they're using Immersive Reader, for instance, if you can capture a video and put that in a sway, great. But if you can't capture a video, maybe just get a screenshot and then annotate it underneath. But really it's about how that tool has increased accessibility, and it doesn't have to focus on just one, but Immersive Reader is the main one to make sure you mention. So whatever happens, do not skip Immersive Reader. If you happen to talk about Translator as well, or you're using some of the PowerPoint tools, or you're looking at subtitles, do mention those, but don't step over Immersive Reader. Immersive Reader is absolutely something that should be mentioned in this section. So examples to put into the question 2. Could be customizing colors and fonts or changing the sizes of the fonts. Could also be if you are a member of staff, and this is not pupil focused, this is educators across the school. Could be that you've used Outlook and you've changed some of the features in the web version of Outlook to make it more accessible for communications. And as I've said, those live captions, whether you've used them as Teams meetings, or whether you had them over the top of a PowerPoint because you've used Translator with different languages. There's some examples of key areas that will score highly that Microsoft are looking for when they come to review this area. So that's question 2, in essence. Labor those accessibility tools. We spent a whole session looking at ourselves. If you've forgotten those, the recording's there. My deck is there over in our team, so you can always go back and pick those up as well. Anything around that question anybody like to check with me before I move on to the next question? No? Okay. So question 3, this one is a bit more in depth, and I think the last question is just getting you geared up and getting you used to it. This one is where it starts to dive a little bit deeper. So this is thinking about a linked series of events, be it lessons or a project or a unit of work, whichever way around it is for you, but it needs to be a sequence. It doesn't have to be a long sequence. Could be 2 or 3 steps in a project, but it needs to be something that's not just been done in one go, that's happened in a number of steps, and how it incorporates what you've done with learners and Microsoft technology and improved the learning outcomes for those learners that you're working with. So this is where 21st century learning design comes in. It'll be something you're doing anyway. It's just a phrase that's used by Microsoft, but we've got some more resources that you can use as well. And in today's session, that's going to incorporate those aspects that you'll have found in the MEC previously, and they're very strongly featured in Learn. But it will be about using a transferable set of skills and toolkits to find success in other lessons. So it could be that you've shown them how to use maybe ink in OneNote class notebook in a particular IT lesson or a computing lesson, and then they've taken that and they've used that for note taking, maybe in English, or they've been doing some project work and they've done it that way, and they've dropped in some pictures along with annotating notes or illustrated a picture and so forth. But 21st century learning design is about giving them those transferable skills and then using them in those other contexts. This one is a bigger area, which is why I'm going to spend a bit more time going into it today, and also one that we were going to spend a little more time on the 7th, but as you need to have your application in the 7th, we'll cover it now. So the 21st century skills are around collaboration, collaborative learning. It's also about how you assimilate and construct the own knowledge in your head. It's about you thinking, well, I've got a challenge here. How can I solve this problem? It is about developing, as I've said, those areas that we do labour quite often, resilience in learning, and thinking about how we can communicate effectively, working with peers, but also strong individual thought process as well, being able to work through things methodically. They're all in there in 21st century learning design and skills, and we know that they touch on other theoretical learning practices that we use in teaching, that we also use across the whole school. We may form part of our own CPD, and when we were training, we were exposed to lots of them. But whichever philosophy you're applying, 21st century learning design brings a lot of those elements in too. So it is in MEC, but it's also in Learn as a pathway, and there's a course in there about using OneNote with 21st century learning design. Now I've pulled that out and I've got some direct links in this slide deck, and there are also some rubrics. If I go on to the next page for you, what it does is quite a large OneNote, but what you can do is you can download your own copy of it and put it into OneNote class notebook. And it's got different sections, but within each of the sections of the OneNote class notebook, and there's an excerpt there in the top right hand corner that you'll be able to see when you do download it, it goes through all of those different areas that we've just spoken about for 21st century learning, like collaboration or improving communication skills. And then within each of those sections in your OneNote class note, but there'll be pages on it individually. So it gives you a really strong background, and it prepares you thoroughly for answering this question, because you will need to mention the philosophies of 21st century learning design. and how you've used different technologies. And here is a really good example of where to use OneNote, not just to get the information about it, but also OneNote is really good for 21st century learning design and skills. You can go through, have a look at the rubric, and you'll be able to get far more information about it. But as well as that, there's still the course in the MEC, and there's lots of individual courses in Learn that you can undertake. If you just type in 21st century learning design, either in the MEC as it was or in Learn, and Learn is probably the best place to go now, because going forward, that's where your pathways are going to be. You'll be able to go in, and if you haven't done anything with it yet, don't panic. There will be a learning pathway, which is a sequence of individual courses that will take you through the philosophies, takes you through all of the different areas like collaboration, communication, and so forth. And it gives you then the associated Microsoft technologies. When you hit those associated Microsoft technologies, they are the ones that you're looking for to demonstrate you've used some in the answer to this question. You don't have to shoehorn absolutely everything in, but when people came to this question last year, the feedback I got was this is the most challenging, A, to get your head around, but also to pare down your answers. So there's the rubric that I'm speaking about in the screenshot of the Microsoft OneNote that you're going to get access to through all the links that are over here on the left-hand side. But try to mention all of the different areas in turn, and talk about maybe how you've disseminated responsibility in the classroom, how you've given pupils ownership for learning and being able to shape that learning and choose the direction it goes in. And we're probably doing that anyway in all our other teaching methods, but you just need to think about how you can do that. A good example here also is Minecraft Education Edition. It's another one where often it becomes pupil or student led, because you'll show them the original skill sets and then they'll take it and they'll run with it in a different way. And we spent quite a bit of time introducing you to Microsoft Education Edition in the last session. So the rubric examples are listed out there individually, or you can go and get the whole thing from the top link in this slide. And it goes through the knowledge construction, the self-regulation, how to deal with challenge, how to not give up, how to make sure that you think logically and systematically when you're problem solving. And that doesn't come naturally to everyone we work with, we know that. But what this does is it promotes those behaviors so that they can then take them and they can be successful, not just in other subjects in school, but as lifelong learners at the same time. And that's a really key element that should come across here. So examples that you can use above and beyond the ones that I've spoken about, you could say Forms is a good example for creating a paper-free environment for collecting resources and collecting data and then analysing that data. It might be that you've used that with classroom quizzes with pupils and students. It could be that you've used it across the wider school, either to have surveys with staff or collect information from parents. Whichever way you want to contextualise it from the work that you've been doing, it's worth mentioning Forms on top of Minecraft, on top of OneNote as well. You can talk about using PowerPoints and how you might have recorded those PowerPoints either in Teams or how you might be organizing those in streams. We touched upon that, and using streams as a video platform to organize the videos recorded. Maybe you've just got a channel that you're using with the pupils that you teach, and maybe you've shared some of those links back into Teams itself if you've got a class team. It could be that you are creating a Sway, or the non-Microsoft product there is Adobe Spark, because I know a lot of people use that. It might be pupils that have used Sways to make a quick presentation. It could be that you've used Sways for newsletters, or you're planning a trip and therefore you've created an informational Sway. There's lots of different reasons that you could use those technologies, but they all come into that 21st century learning design. But the key to it here, if I go back one slide, is to grab that rubric in that OneNote. It's quite comprehensive, and go through and look at each of the steps in those areas and just understand what it is, and then play that back a little bit with some relevant examples with evidence, impact and outcomes, and pick the ones. If you think you haven't done some of those, pick the ones you have done. If you were going to use some of those in other areas, by the end of this presentation, you might think, well, actually, there's another example I could use in another question, and I can bring the thing that I was going to do with Forms back into 21st century learning design. you will inevitably end up moving some of your evidence and your answers around, and what you've planned originally to answer one question all of a sudden will then become better for another question. And that is quite natural and something that people have often done a lot of in the last 2 weeks before submitting their application in previous years. 21st century learning design probably is the thing that's going to take the most time in the time that you have remaining. So are there questions on that today? Is there anything you'd like to ask me about that question before I move on to the next question?
Can I just ask, in terms of doing the whole application?
Yes.
I mean, obviously it's going to depend from person to person, but what sort of time commitment do you think it's going to take just to do the actual, I'm not talking about doing any more of the CPD or whatever, but just to actually fill in the application?
Most people normally said they've put a couple of hours aside on 2 different days to build the Word document, which essentially is the application on side just exported into a Word document, and then about another hour or 2 to copy and paste it across. People that decided to go for it and just do it online and save it as they went, with hindsight, have always said to me they wish they'd done it in the Word document. So you're probably looking, and again, it depends on how much you've kept notes on the way through and how good those notes are. You're probably looking at a half day or just over to gather it and structure it in a sort of draft form in the Word document, and then a couple more hours to get it across onto the self-nomination portal.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Okay, no problem. If we skip forwards out of this question and into question 4, question 4 is another biggish question to try and get your answer pared down and keep it fairly exact. It does spill over onto the next slide, but there's some key pointers in here that you'll need to get into your Sway portfolio or your Sway that you are going to put in your application portal, and that's for you to really focus on what you've done with supporting the pupils or the students that you work with and demonstrate how you've enriched their learning on top of traditional teaching methods. So the learning tools that you use here are a bit more open, and I'll give you some examples of which ones you might want to say you've used. But in here could come the very traditional sense of Microsoft Office with PowerPoint or Word, but you can again get the use of Sway itself in here. That's a really good one to bring in. But what you're trying to do is show that you're creating media-rich open learning. So again, OneNote could be a good example here, where you start with a page in OneNote and it's a blank canvas essentially, and you can drop all sorts of things on there, whether it's a video, a URL for a website, or anything else. But make sure that you talk about the technologies, and it could come all the way through to, look, I've used a particular feature in the web browser. So I've had people in this section here in question 4 talk about, well, I've used the Edge browser, and in the Edge browser I've used the reader tool up in the address bar at the top, and I've been using the reader tool to read websites. So when a pupil needs to be independent and being able to access the information on the website, they've gone on and they've used that rather than using some of the other browsers that you've got out there. And the Edge browser in Windows 10 and Windows 11 has worked really well for that. So there is quite a bit of scope here to mop up with areas that you've maybe stolen examples, particularly with the previous question, but you've still got some left. You could use in here things like Flipgrid as well, so you could incorporate that, and we did have a discussion about Flipgrid, but you might use some of those more traditional things, such as you could use tasks and planner, so it could be keeping track of tasks or organizing your planner online. We had a quick look at those in the second session. But there's a lot of different areas that you can bring in on here in learning. So it could be organizing learning and structuring their learning, and it might be you've done that in Teams as well through posts, or you might have files in the files section they can go and access. It could be assignments in Teams that you mentioned in here as well. So there's a lot of different areas that you can bring in the way of Microsoft tools. Some you may have used less as the years progressed, so it's okay to say, look, the use of this, it just tailed off, but actually we went on to using that. And just make sure again that you just talk about the evidence you've got, show screenshots, show videos, give good examples of where it's been relevant to use that technology, but also keep talking about the impact it's either had for you or the learners you're working with, and how it's improved their outcomes by bringing it in and using it compared to not using it. Question 5 is describing the artifact is an unusual word to use, and demonstrating how it's got the desired learning objectives and outcomes. So this again is a good example of where you can bring in all of those other smaller apps that you might have got there, or aspects within an app. So again, Teams is a good example. You may have recorded a staff meeting because you couldn't get all staff there, and it could have been for a particular reason. Maybe there was an important speaker, maybe you were in a trust and actually someone from the central trust team only had a certain amount of time and they were meeting with various academies in that trust. It could be that you had a first aider in for training. Whatever the scenario is, you can say, look, I've recorded this video, but we've made it available later by posting that video in our staff team, or we've added it to our channels in Stream. It might be that you're surveying parents or you're surveying students about changes to something you're going to have in the school, and you've used Flipgrids for them to make video responses. There's lots of different ways here that you could bring that technology in, but this is also a good example of it if you're focusing in teams and class teams, and where you can pin extra apps inside of Teams itself. So maybe you've been using Wakelet or something like that, and you've been pinning that into the class team so that pupils can use it, or maybe as staff you've been using other technologies. It could be Kahoot for questions and quizzes in class. If you've used any of those and you've brought them into a Microsoft technology such as Teams, and you've pinned them there for ease of access to stop pupils getting distracted or wandering off, to maintain focus, or to utilize time that you would normally have lost, so you've got better effective use of the learning time in the classroom, whatever the example is, pop it in there. It could be something as simple as having a OneNote class notebook, and whereas you might have done it previously on a Word document, you've got all of the hyperlinks you need for a particular lesson for pupils to use in that OneNote, and then there's a space for pupils to write their answers underneath the hyperlink. But instead of them having to wander off to websites, they click the hyperlink, it opens up the browser, and away they go, instead of them trying to type that URL in and waste the valuable time that you have with them there as well. Question 6 is getting towards the end of things, but question 6 itself, you have to give 2 strong examples of where you've supported your own individual development and learning and the growth of your colleagues. So this is very much about you working in the philosophy of an MIEE, where you're a digital ambassador, a digital lead in the school. And I know many of you are that have come along to the course as we've gone through, but it's how you have changed either the course of the school or immediate colleagues around you. It could be within a phase, it could be within a subject, it could be within a faculty. However you've worked to try and share what you've been learning on these sessions, what you've been learning through your own CPD, maybe through the MEC or Learn as it is now, and then how you've helped others to develop their workload. And this can be a multitude of things. It could be, again, using forms to work efficiently with data collection. Maybe the people used to use pieces of paper. It could be that you've used all sorts of things with going on to Learn and thought, this is a really good course, I'm going to share this at a staff meeting. If you've presented at a staff meeting and something's been adopted holistically in the school, do talk about it. What Microsoft want to know here is how much of a presence you've had internally and externally. So maybe you've been able to work in a local network of schools. Maybe you've got an outreach program going on where you go and work with other colleagues in other schools. Maybe you just did a video meeting over Teams and you connected with other people. It could be that you were asked to talk by Microsoft or present or something, or you could be taking other qualifications such as a Microsoft certified educator or a Microsoft Office certification, but they're all available. And I know that some people that are doing the MIEE course, when they went to events such as BET, and those qualifications were free, if they felt they were able to do so, did those as well. But it won't go against you if you haven't done an MCE. Don't worry. But if there's anything else you've gained in the way of qualifications, even if they're qualifications that you've gained in Learn and you've now got an extra badge and it stands out as a badge you've had to do a lot of work for, or it's something that you know that would mean that it's a differentiation between you and another MIEE candidate, make sure they come in here. If you work in a showcase school, and you know that you've adopted certain philosophies by being a Microsoft Showcase school, mention that in here as well too. So it's just really what you've been doing that's relevant to you. Any questions on those last three examples there? No? Okay, I'm going to move forwards then. So the third stage, as we said, there's the form, the self-nomination form, which is the Word document, the one I've spoken about. It's there to go and grab, and it will help you to structure these answers that we've been going through. The areas where people have failed previously and not been given MIEE award status is that people haven't given sufficient answers in those questions that have been asked and elaborated. Microsoft generally want it to be, as you probably would as a teacher when you're looking at pupils' work or student work, you want it to be slightly punchy. You want to know what somebody's done, why they've done it, what were the outcomes, what's the impact it's had. Those are the key areas to keep in your head as you go through. Make sure that you do give evidence of where you've innovated, and it could be innovation in the most straightforward of terms. An example I've used a few times with the form, move from paper to online forms. It could be that we've gone from paper newsletters to using Sway newsletters. Whatever it is, just make sure it comes across really clearly but succinctly at the same time. You want to show that you are using technology, but you're not using it too basically. So as we've said, if there are things such as you've got touch enabled devices in the middle of the year, or suddenly you've been able to use a stylus where you weren't previously, it might be you're using OneNote class notebook now as a teacher instead of using other third-party products, and you keep all of your teaching on there and you've just made them available to pupils so that they can get access to resources outside of school. Something like that about using the technology in a way that's showing impact and innovation is what Microsoft wants to hear, and rather than just the very basics. Well, I've opened up OneNote and I had a play around with it, but I didn't really do anything. Make sure that you give a reason for having used that technology, and that reason's absolutely screaming at them and telling them exactly why you used it and the impact it's had. You need to demonstrate a dedication, sharing those innovations in that last question that I spoke about what you're doing inside of school for digital transformation and change management, or locally with others. Make sure that you mention some example of that, however small it's been, even if it's just working with one colleague, and then you've got plans to work with more colleagues later on, maybe when you get past GCSE exams as they currently are at the moment and A-levels. Whatever it is, talk about plans as well, and they're really important to mention. And as I've said, for anyone that's a returning MIEE, make sure you evidence what you did when you were previously an MIEE, how you worked across that community, what you did to help others globally as well as locally, and also those innovations that have happened since you became qualified. The application window did open up on May the 5th. It will close on July the 7th. There will be a mop-up round 2 this year, approximately around the 15th of November 22. Microsoft are yet to confirm those dates precisely, but it's usually about a month's window from about the middle of November to December. So if you're just overwhelmed at the moment, you find that you can't get through, you only half apply and you run out of time to get your application in, you have got the option to aim for the round 2 around Christmas time if that works better for you. But obviously we would like to support you in getting your application in this time. There is a set of resources that are really useful to go and pick up, and what we've tried to do is bring them in to one place for you. So when you get today's presentation, there's some links to the old Education Centre, and there's obviously links to Learn as well in the previous slides. There's also an accessibility checker which links to accessibility tools. There's loads of links here to key Flipgrid articles and uses of Teams. There's also the links to Minecraft Education Edition and how to get the most out of that and use it across the curriculum. I mentioned about using Edge for things like Immersive Reader for web pages, and there's examples there, including YouTube videos. And there are some more links in addition to the ones on the slides that I showed you previously there for 21st century learning design. Some great courses on Learn for that as well, so I'd always recommend going to have a look there too. If you are somebody who teaches computing and it's your thing to look at coding, there's some resources there about Make Code. There are also some sessions that Microsoft have run on Hacking STEM, which are very much about getting young individuals from around the world together. And it can be coding, it can be problem solving, it can be creative, it can be engineering at the same time. And then there's the Microsoft Imagine Academy, which gives pupils and students the ability to go in and find resources and opportunities for them at the same time. So I've put all those resources into one place, so you don't have to go scratching around for them, and you can just use those sets of slides. What it looks like as a timeline: you need to get your application submitted for round 1 of this year in by the 7th of July, as I've said. Round 2 for this year, which would be slightly to the right hand side of this slide, you can see last year's there in red, will be approximately, as I've said, mid-November to mid-December if you find you missed this window. We are still there inside the team, so we've got our community and our team going at the same time. And then Microsoft, towards the end of August, will have reviewed and assessed all of the applications from everybody globally, and then they will notify you if you've been successful. And they also publish publicly an open list of everybody around the world for all the different countries who are a qualified MIEE, and you'll have that qualification for a year, and then you reapply if you think you need to. So that's the same thing in a different sort of timeline. But I know the questions have come up already, do plan in a bit of time running up to it to structure and build and flesh out your answers for those phase 3 questions in particular, when it gets around to those 500 to 2,000 word questions. Now, I said also I would give you a code to redeem in Learn. The code to redeem in Learn is on screen now. To redeem codes in Learn, it's slightly different to how you did it in MEC. You need to be logged in as you did with MEC, but once you're logged in, as you can see from my example there, you need to click on your profile in the top right hand corner, and once you've clicked on your profile, you'll get to your individual profile. In the middle of the page where I've circled it with a yellow, you can click a box which is a hyperlink to redeem your achievement codes. You'll then get a redeem code box that pops up in the middle of the screen, just like the old MEC used to, and you can pop in that new style code, and that will give you 1,000 points in Learn. If you've already got MIE in the old MEC, don't worry about it. You don't have to go and do masses, particularly when you're already pushed this time of year in a new setting. You can just use the qualification you had from the old setting, screenshot it, pop it into your Sway, and then use that for evidence there. For those people that haven't been to Learn yet, I'll pop the Learn link into our chat so that you can go over there if you need to. So that's the link to get to Microsoft Learn. At this point, it's really over to you. Is there anything you want to share about the applications you've already completed, or any other questions that you might have, or anything you need support on? One of the other things I'm going to ask you to do while you're going through, and I haven't asked until the end session, is we'd like to get some feedback this session about what we've run and what we've offered. It's really short. It's about 7 questions in total. But if you've got anything you could offer us in the way of feedback, we would gladly like to hear that. We can use that to improve next year's course. So really, it's over to you. Is there anything else you'd like to ask me? Is there anything you'd like to explore? And I'm going to stop the recording at this point as well for anyone who's wondering.